Hey everyone, getting our stuff back up for our 5-minute intermission. All right. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Goodness, I hate breaking it in the morning and breaking into an afternoon session, but that's apparently the rules. Did not know that yesterday. We learned that the hard way, and so at least now we have a little bit of prep time to do that transition. Give you a little bit of a breather. Give me a little bit of a breather. Scarf some food. Take a break and stretch out a little bit. This chair looks comfy. Not that comfy. Okay, so let's jump into the conversation. First thing I want to say is we have a new volunteer moderator. He was already in the conversation before the break even started, but I wanted to give him some kudos, some credit. So this afternoon for the second half of the day, all right, hang tight, guys. Never mind. Okay. Oh, someone said that I was muted, and I'm freaked out about that. I take that super seriously now, obviously, after yesterday. So our moderator this afternoon, a volunteer, honorary, esteemed, prestigious, I give them all the superlatives that I can, moderator this afternoon is Louis Lessig. He is a partner at the law firm of Brown and Connery, LLP in Westmont, New Jersey. When he's not practicing law and in that employment practice there, he is a volunteer for the state director for the Garden State Council, SHRM, up in New Jersey, and he's the past president for Philadelphia chapter. So lots of volunteer time, lots of street cred there, and lots of support for the HR community. I already saw you, again, Louis, sharing there, and I appreciate that about you already jumping in, going above and beyond, engaging with the audience. So thank you for that. Next up, again, I said this earlier, and I wasn't kidding. One of our top requests for speakers this week was Steve Brown. People wanted to hear from him. He's just a wonderful, supportive, kind-hearted person, and you'll hear that, I'm sure, in the conversation with him. It's going to come through. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to let Steve come on. He's going to talk about intentional connectivity. Let's get this up so we can see. Okay, guys. It's queued up. There he is. I can see Steve, but you can't see Steve. So I'm trying to fix that. There we go. You can see Steve. Intentional connection. We're going to hear from Steve on how to do this. And again, it's going to be all kinds of wonderful and incredible. I can't wait to share it. So I'm going to get out of the way. Here's Steve. No one said the code word, but let's see if I can get this thing working properly and get Steve up on the screen, because I have been trying to get this thing working properly, and apparently that middle break today got me good. So here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to HR Summer School Fireside Chats. So when I went out there and I asked everybody that's kind of tuned in, watching what's happening, I have a kind of a group of people that are supporting the event, and I said, hey, who do you want to see take the virtual stage, talk about what's on their heart? And one of the resounding answers was Steve Brown. I want to hear from the most connected man in HR, as I like to call him. So I have him here with us. Steve, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, Ben. It's so cool. I'm so glad you're doing this program. I think it's needed, and I'm glad you're putting it on.
Absolutely. Well, it's about education, it's about inspiration, but it's also about connection. And that's where I really want to hear from you a little bit, because I wasn't kidding a minute ago. Like, everyone I know knows you. And when I'm like, hey, I meet random people when I was in England earlier this year, and they're like, oh, Steve Brown. Yeah, absolutely. So like, that's both amazing and like crazy that you've done that. So talk a little about what you do first, give the audience some background into who Steve is, and then I'll dive into kind of that question thread and try to tease out how we can all do that a little better.
Sure. Professionally, I'm in HR. Been HR my entire career. Now I'm an executive, which is kind of fun to think about. I'm not your typical executive when you think of HR, and I tend to do HR much differently than most. Much more people-centric, always have been. After my first job, to be honest. My first job, didn't know that you could be people-centric. Then I learned, doggone it, you need to do this. But I've been in environments where I've been allowed to do that. And since I've been so people-oriented naturally as a person, it just made sense to connect outside of my organization. And so I've been doing it for decades.
I'm not surprised to hear that. And I actually had that same first job in HR, where they're like, the people are a necessary evil for us doing a job. I'm like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be serving the people. Isn't that what our job is all about? And so it took the second job before I realized, like, okay, maybe I'm not the crazy one here. Maybe that is actually an opportunity. That's how things should work. So you talked about why you did that a little bit, right? That's just your natural bent. Maybe your natural inclination is to reach out there and connect with people. I don't know if it's easy to answer this question or not, but what is it like? Like how do you do that intentionally? I guess I'll ask that more practical question of how do you do that intentionally?
I learned from my mom. When I grew up in a small town, very small town, 2,500 people, and it was Mayberry, basically. And when you saw everybody, you'd walk up and down the street and everyone would talk to you by name. They wouldn't just say hello. They would say, hello, Ben. And they would do it. Every person. You walk into the drugstore and they go, oh, it's Mr. Smith. Hey, Steve. And it was just naturally our environment. So it was modeled for me. And then when I went to, I was in a small school where it was K through 12 in one building. And this was in the 1980s. So it's not like, pioneer days.
Stone Age. No, this was modern day.
Modern day still is K through 12 in one building. And I would know the teachers from kindergarten all the way through the superintendent. And I would know every student in every grade by name. And I'd walk down the hall and greet them by name. So it didn't seem abnormal for me. Then I went to college, and in college, I just started doing it again. And my fellow classmates used to get upset. I'd walk to class and I would say hi to every single person on the way to class and every person on the way back. And they go, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? People don't want to do this. And this is what I found. People want to be recognized. People want to be acknowledged more than just a casual greeting. Casual greetings are great. Casual greetings are polite. You should do those things. But honestly, most casual greetings, we don't care. We don't really care how you're doing. We just say hello to say
surface level.
Yeah. Hi, Ben. How you doing? Good. And then we move off. When you say somebody's name, they stop. It puts them in their tracks. So I've always felt that added value to relationships, even if they were very circumstantial, Then if a person chose to take a relationship deeper, you had a much better in than just being somebody who's a passerby. As an HR person, you can do HR and do it passerby style, and people will despise you. But you can do it intentionally, and connecting people is far more than knowing names, but knowing names is the key to start.
I remember the Dale Carnegie quote. I don't know if you've read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. I would be surprised if you had, but it's like the sweetest sound in any language is that person's own name, right? So taking that kind of approach that you've taken there, I have always struggled to remember names, and I try to be intentional about it. And I'll go in a room and someone's like, okay, that's Mary and that's Jim, and over there by the coffee pot is Joe. And I'm like, okay, like I'm trying to solidify all this. Any tips from you? Because you seem to be really good at it. Even if you fumble once in a while, none of us see that. We just see the Steve that knows everyone. So any tips or ideas on how to do that better?
Yes, I think there's two things. First, it has to matter. When I see you, it has to matter that I know you by name. For instance, I know you, I know your wife, and I know your kids, but I know you. Now, I'll ask you your wife, I don't know her name. I don't get to see her regularly. And we get so caught up of, oh, if I forget Ben's wife's name, he's going to hate me forever. You don't know my wife's name. We put all of this junk in our head that gets in the way because we're embarrassed, and it's not embarrassing at all. You have to get past that. And then it has to matter to know somebody's names. And I'll give you one quick example before I give you the tip. When you and I met in person for the first time at the HR Evolution in Atlanta, I knew everybody's name before I walked in there. And so when I met Dan Crosby, I go, hey, Daniel, how are you? He's like, how do you know my name? Well, I've seen your face. I've read your name. I can put two and together. Hi, Ben. Nice to meet you. Like, how do you know me? We're fascinated that someone knows our names. The trick I learned a long time ago was say a person's name 3 times the first time you meet them and say something about them or learn something about them. So you say, we can do it here. Hi, Steve. So that's me. Hi, Ben. Hi, Ben. I'm Steve. Ben, tell me what you do.
I'm a writer.
So, Ben, you're a writer. What kind of things do you write, Ben?
I write about how to make work more human.
So, Ben, when you write about things that make work more human, I also noticed that you wrote about AI. How does that make work more human, Ben?
We can keep going on this, but I get the thread here. I get your kind of
right.
It's
so my thing is, you every time you ask about somebody, you tie their name to it.
It sounds weird to say it. You're like,
it does.
hey, when you're doing it, it doesn't sound weird. But when you're like, I want you to say someone's name 3 times in the next 30 seconds, we're like, that's going to be awkward. Like, I'm going to try to like force that in the situation. But if you have just a little dialogue like that, and again, I guess on your end, you're kind of cementing this is who that person is. So next time I'm thinking about, hey, that person that writes about making work more human, that's what I've been, right? And it's easy to tie that back.
Right, and I want to have a better chance to remember your name. It's not foolproof, okay? The other thing that's hard with remembering names is capacity. If you're a person who has a tight circle of friends, chances are you're good with 10 to 20 names. And you'll know them and you'll know everything about their lives. Some people are wired differently and they can have a much larger capacity. I know thousands of people by name. We had talked right before we got on the call about how you went to London, and there was a tweet up in London, and it was put on by Kate Griffiths Lambeth, which is the coolest English name ever. And when I walked in, I said, hi, David. Hi, Simon. Hi, Sarah. And they're like, how do you know? I'm like, I've known you for a long time. Now we get to meet in person. And it just made everything much more personalized. I think connections need to be personal, but in order to do that, you need to be more vulnerable first and put it out there instead of being more guarded.
So let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, yes, I believe this. I understand. I grasp it mentally. What are the actual, maybe they grasp it emotionally. Let's give them some rational ideas. Like, what are some benefits of this? If you are getting better at this, whether it's broadly or even as an HR leader, you said it kind of yourself, you hinted at this, that you can know your people better, even if you have a large workforce. Like, what are some benefits of this kind of approach?
I think one of the biggest benefits is something I've seen that HR should be doing is we are the connector inside our organization, not people by names, but our job is to pull people together. So I pull Gary from finance and have him work with Megan from marketing. And Gary and Megan are great performers on their own, but I need to get Gary and Megan to work together. So I'm that conduit. Being a connection is a conduit. I mean, if you look at the word connect, it's pulling things together. It's not just a big name game. So being a conduit in your organization, number one thing. Secondly, it personalizes the workplace. And if you can't personalize the workplace, you can't do HR in a people-centric environment. You're going to lead with things instead of people. You need to lead with people.
There was a story I heard recently. I know you love stories, so I want to share it really quick. There's a town in Illinois called Rockford, and they were trying to end homelessness for veterans. And they'd been fighting it for like 10 years, and they made a change. And then within the next 12 months had eliminated veteran homelessness completely. And the one big change they made was they stopped saying, okay, we have X number of homeless people in our area, but they started saying, okay, who's seen Gary lately? Is he still staying in this place? What can we do for Gary? Okay, what about Maria? Okay, I saw her the other day. Someone saw Maria. What about her? And they started humanizing it and they solved this huge problem of veteran homelessness in the second largest city in the state of Illinois. Right. So if humanizing can work on that scale, it can work at your scale in your company. So I love that idea, Steve.
Yeah, and what I found, Ben, is that when you do that, people are much more open to having conversations, and you learn what's really going on with them, both positive and negative. We keep trying to confine everything instead of allowing it to just be itself, and people be themselves. I don't expect anybody to be like me, not one person. I want to come learn you for you. And if you have things that are very different than I am, you should, because you're a person. All of the things that we keep trying to program, diversity, inclusion, recognition, performance management, all these things would be so much simpler if we had a people lens first. And you personalize it first, and I'm telling you, they just flow.
I love that. Goodness, I'm over here. I wish I was making notes as you're talking here, because I'm getting some good ideas on this. And this is kind of the way that I learned early on. Like I said earlier, I made the joke about it, but I learned early on that the people focused version of HR, it shouldn't be this mutually exclusive category where, like, okay, I'm a business person and I'll force all these HR policies on you, like you were saying. Like, this is just a process approach, because at the end of the day, the workforce is human, and treating them as such will allow you to support them, serve them in a better way, and lead them in a better way, instead of treating them like widgets or employee number 731. I need you to come to the office. Like, that's we laugh about that because we know it's true in some companies.
Oh, it's
some company out
true.
there right now, as we're talking about this, some company out there is saying, hey, someone call in employee 731, right? Because there are people that don't do this. And that's why I specifically wanted to have you here for summer school, to encourage this. It's inspiring to hear how you do this and to hear that encouragement. And I'm personally thinking, like, next time I meet someone, how am I going to do this 3 times? How am I going to use their name so that I can talk to them and get this and remember this? Because that is going to make that connection that much deeper and more meaningful with that person.
When the pandemic first hit, the first thing I saw was policy driven by our peers on social media. And one of my favorite ones was, we're letting people work from home, and we haven't given them a technology policy of using their tech for work purposes and all this stuff, and we didn't have them sign out their laptop and da-da-da. And so I wrote them back, and it's not my company. And I said, do you have a problem of people stealing laptops? And they said, no. I said, then why do you have a policy about it? And they went, well, we're supposed to, because that's what we do. I said, why don't you say, hey, Ben, this is our equipment. I need you to do your job through it. Can you do your job? Are you equipped to do your job? Because if you're equipped, man, I can't wait to work with you. And I know it's a whole new work environment, and I trust you. And they went, does that work? I go, yes. But I think we've been too, I don't know what the right word, pressed into a mold that we think this is the only way to operate. One of the things I'm working on, this sounds so awful, for my new book, is a new theory, and I call it the theory of HR. And what it is this: most companies start with results and then develop processes. We look at year-over-year results, or month-over-month, or quarter-over-quarter, and we go, okay, we're up, we're down, we're in between. Therefore, we develop new processes, and then we stop. When you ask people who manage people, what's the number one thing they do all day? They talk about people. They do. Even if they're talking about a work process, it's like, well, Steve's not doing this, this, and this. They don't say the work's not getting done. They put a name to it. So, and I write about this, but I changed it to say people plus processes equals results. So if I start with the people first, I give them the processes to do their jobs well, I'm going to get the results I'm really desiring. And if companies would do that, it would change who we are. But in order to do that, you need to be a connector. You can't do it just out of theory. You have to be someone who is well known by your people, that you are the connection they can rely on.
That is excellent. I love that. Plus, one of the last questions I want to ask you about is, I know for those of you that are listening right now, you want to check it out. Steve has already written a book that was wildly popular, super bestseller, all over SHRM, called HR on Purpose. Correct? Mm-hmm. And what's the kind of the I want to say the plot? It's not a fiction book. What is the summary of HR HR on purpose.
Uh, the big plot is that we need to own what we do. We've been apologizing and apologetic for being in HR instead of owning what we do. Every other profession says, I'm a salesperson, I'm a finance person, I'm a marketer. We go, I'm sorry, I'm in HR. Or, oh gosh, I'm in HR, and we just, everything is, dark, doom and gloom, and we have to deal with those effing people. And you go, wait a minute, you're a person. And we forgot that. We have lost the idea that HR people are humans as well. We just completely beat it out of them. So the whole book is own what you do, love what you do, and thrive in what you do.
All right. I love that. And then you've got a new one that you're working on right now, correct?
Yes.
Called HR Rising. Is that correct?
HR Rising. Yeah.
Awesome.
So the tagline, because every book has to have a tagline, evidently, it says from ownership to leadership. So the whole point is, now that you own what you do, how do you lead from where you are? But it's very similar. It's not a model. It's a series of stories and different attributes and behaviors that can help you lead, regardless of the level you have in HR. So you don't have to be a CHRO to lead. You can be a coordinator to lead. You can be a director, whatever role.
FT Admin 3, lead where you
Right.
are.
Lead where you are. And so I think it's just something that's been missing, just as I felt the other part was missing in our profession. I'm just trying to fill the gap to have people be more confident in what they do.
Awesome. I love that. So if someone has listened to you and heard these heartfelt stories, and they can clearly hear the passion in your voice, they want to connect with you, or they want to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
Two places are best. One, LinkedIn. But understand, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I want to see a message from you, why you want to get to know me, and I will connect with you, but it's on. Because now you're a connection. I'm going to know who you are. I'm going to check up on you. I want to see how you're doing, because I want you to succeed. So don't connect with me just to connect and go, ooh, I have another person on LinkedIn. Understand that we're making a commitment to each other. And the other part is Twitter, where I'm very active and visible. And my handle on Twitter is @SBrownHR, and that's Brown with an E, so SBROWNEHR.
Awesome. Steve, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend some time with us, teaching the students here as a faculty, an adjunct, if you will, for HR Summer School. This has been so much fun. I am honored to spend some time with you, and I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks, Ben. It's been a pleasure, and I love seeing you all the time.
Awesome. Good deal. Thank you to everybody else. Hang on for more HR Summer School coming right up. So I told you Steve is just a ball of energy, so much fun. Talking about living HR, living this life, doing this work we're doing on purpose and with a purpose. And I can't wait to see his new book come out, HR Rising. It's going to be phenomenal. He writes like he speaks. So you hear it coming right from his heart, and it's tremendous. So our next speaker is John Thurmond. John, if you ever meet him in person and he has a chance to talk about me, he'll give you this crazy story about how we randomly met on the internet, on social media. We agreed to share a room together at a SHRM conference just to save a couple bucks. And that's how we met originally. And he and I have become friends since then. He runs a great podcast with Wendy Daly called HR Social Hour. He'll talk about some of the things he does. But we're actually here to hear not about the other stuff he does, but his day job. He has a really cool case study to tell us about how this podcast he was developing for his company really came in handy in a time when it's harder. We heard from Sam a little bit ago earlier today. It's hard for people to learn in this different kind of environment. And so this podcast they created internally became a really powerful tool for educating and supporting and connecting their leaders. So really, really great conversation. John does not have video. So when you're like, oh gosh, something's wrong, Ben's broken something else, I probably did, but it wasn't that. So hang tight. We'll bring John on for his conversation.
Thanks, Ben, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about podcasting, a subject that is very near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons. And we're going to be really talking through launching a podcast or considering a podcast, particularly in this day and age, in the pandemic that we're under, launching it from a corporate perspective, and what some of the things that we have done with my organization and where we've gone. So let's talk a little bit about podcasting in the big picture. As I like to tell my mother, podcasting is my internet radio show. Most times it's an audio content, but often video as well. To give you an idea of what does the environment look like for podcasts right now, about 55% of the population has listened to a podcast. So you have to consider at least half of your employee base has heard at least a podcast at one time. About 24% of the population listens to a podcast on a weekly basis. So realistically, a quarter of your folks are listening to something consistently. As of May, there are over 1 million podcasts available in Apple Podcasts in the catalog. Just in the month of April alone, 90,000 new titles were added to that catalog. A lot of opportunities, a lot of different titles and content. And of those 1 million podcasts, there are over 30 million episodes that could be heard at any given time by anyone. And about 46% of podcasts that are in that catalog right now have put out an episode in the last 90 days. Corporate numbers are a little more difficult to gauge. Some people don't necessarily share their numbers. So it's a challenge for me to sit here and tell you what that comparatively is. I will say that many organizations do have podcasts, and they keep those numbers to themselves. It's something I continue to want to learn more about and study and look at what are other organizations doing, because I'll certainly tell you about what we have done in our time with our launch. You might be sitting there and saying, John, why should I even consider a corporate podcast? What's the value? And I think there's really three things to consider if this is indeed something that you are interested in pursuing. The first piece is it's a relatively low entry point when it comes to cost and production. There are really three things that you need to get started. The first being a basic microphone. You can find a good microphone for $100, for example. Some fundamental editing software, basic editing software. Many times you can find those free or at very low cost. And again, just some cursory knowledge of how to use them to get started. And then a way to distribute. How are you going to get that content out to the listeners, to your employee base? So once you've considered that entry point and kind of the cost involved, consider the fact this is a really personal setting. I am a big fan of podcasting for a lot of different reasons. I've been doing it for a long time, and I really like the fact that there's an immediacy to it. I can literally sit down, record a show, put it together, and have it out in a matter of no time, and have it right to a listener's ears. And having said those ears, it's the intimacy of the thing. Most people tend to listen to podcasts on earphones, maybe when they're working out, maybe when they're driving to work, maybe just listening in the car. But there tends to be an intimate experience in the individual, and then the opportunity to engage with others. You can have that podcast as an individual speaking like I am right now, or maybe you do interviews and bring in other people from your team, but it's a way to engage in a different way, in a fun way. And then finally, the convenience of podcasting. Again, if you consider the cost and production and putting one together, the fact that it's really personal, and then the convenience of it to the employee base, they can listen at any time. Maybe it's on a lunch break. Maybe it's on the drive to work. It's a much easier than sending out emails, for example, if I know I have to read it at a certain time or what it may be. Again, I've got some convenience when it comes to the podcast and letting it be a tool that's out there at any given time for somebody to consider. So you're thinking about starting, and what do you need to consider in actual creation of the show? Like what am I doing? Why am I doing it? So several pieces to consider here. First off is your content. What are you going to share? what's the reason for putting together the podcast? Every podcast, be it corporate or public, has a reason, has a direction, and you have to really consider, what am I trying to do with this time? What am I trying to communicate to my employees? You need to consider the format and frequency. And by format, you can have interviews and talk to people one-on-one, or maybe it's scripted. It's one person that's talking just like I am now, and having conversation or discussing a particular topic or item, considering what that's going to look like. Maybe it's a mix of those formats. And then considering the time commitment involved. It takes time to produce and develop this. I usually tell people, when you first get started, to edit and produce and put something together, whatever the average time of a show is going to be, it takes about double that time to make it. So if a show is 15 or 20 minutes long, it's going to take you at least 40 or 45 minutes to put it together. And that's simply the production piece. It's not including the actual time to record and then get the content and put it into your editing software and then clean it up and put it out there and do whatever marketing you're going to do with it. So you have to consider that time commitment and what's going to make sense and work for someone that's there. And then finally, the logistics. How are you going to distribute this podcast? There are a lot of different ways to do it. We're going to talk about what we've done in my organization, but you can look at podcast hosting. You can look at learning management systems. Maybe you host it in-house. So as you think through those things, again, what are you going to share? How are you going to put the content together to share? What's it going to look like? And then again, how are you going to distribute it once you have it in place? So I'm really excited to be able to talk about HR Pro, which is the podcast that I have started for my company, Team Fishel. We launched the show in February. So right as we started hearing things about this potential pandemic and people being ill. So we launched the show in February 2020. And the content and the reason that we decided to do it was to focus on HR topics that were applicable to the entire employee base. I work for a construction company. We are very we don't have offices for the most part. The majority of my folks are in the field, in those construction roles, and this was another way to reach them. I've been incredibly fortunate. I've put together the HR Social Hour half-hour podcast 2.5 years ago, and I was incredibly lucky that my boss listened, was a fan, and came to me and said, "I love what you're doing with HR Social Hour. I would love to translate that here to Team Fishel, because I think it's a great way for us to be communicating." We had a lot of management folks that were using podcasts from outside the organization in training and having potential leaders and those that they were developing start to listen to shows and learn different things from those other podcasts. So my boss really saw it as a way to boost our signal within the company in a different way, in an exciting way. So we focused on those topics that were applicable to the employee base. And when we first started, I was fortunate enough, I had traveled to corporate. I took my recording equipment. We recorded multiple shows at one time, just over a period of several days, knocked out several shows with a group of people, things that had been scripted in terms of interviews and asking certain questions of certain people. Now I'm using Squadcast, which is one of many platforms that's out there when it comes to recording remotely, but it's what I use when I'm talking to my peers and recording content, if it's not me doing a scripted solo type show. As we started looking at some of the options for posting and how were we going to distribute the podcast, we decided initially on utilizing our own learning management system, or LMS, and working with our LMS provider. We decided that we would have downloadable content, so you could download the MP3 file onto a phone or onto your computer and listen to it there through a player, or you could stream it directly from the LMS, giving people different options based on where they were and what their access would be. Again, when we started, we were excited. I started with 4 or 5 shows that were ready to go when we launched. And then what do you know? COVID-19 happened. As I mentioned, we are a construction company. We are incredibly fortunate within our organization that we are considered essential. We help keep the lights on, the internet running, natural gas going through the pipelines. So work didn't necessarily shift for us. How we did our work shifted, but the work was still there. As I mentioned, 80% of my workforce, my teammates, are in the field working. About the other 20% are now working from home. And we started thinking about how can we have conversations, get messages out that everybody's inundated with emails, everybody gets mailers, but what other way could we reach them? Well, here's the new HR Pro podcast that we had just launched. It was on our LMS. We said, okay, why don't we start looking at other ways to use that model and use that platform to communicate these other messages. So a lot of my focus shifted in the last many weeks from talking about maybe directly HR issues and HR content when it comes to, say, harassment or performance reviews and how to deliver performance reviews, even talking about a major shift that we had with changing healthcare providers. A lot of that messaging shifted to more safety content. Again, being construction, being in the field and knowing what's going on with the pandemic. We have offices in 15 states, and we've been incredibly fortunate to keep our teammates very safe. But talking about, if someone had told me a year ago that I would be recording content talking about how to make hand sanitizer based on CDC guidelines and recipes, I would have told you were nuts. But it's something we did because we felt like it was viable and important for us to have that out there. So that safety messaging really came to the front in the last many weeks with COVID out there. And the last piece that we did and considered was, okay, great, we've got it on the LMS. We know people are listening. What other ways, what other places could we put it? About the same time that I launched HR Pro for Team Fishel, we had just revised and enhanced our employee portal. A lot of time and resources have been put into communicating about the portal and really encouraging teammates to go there to get content, particularly about benefits and what have you. We've decided, great place to be able to put the show. Why not put the podcasts there as well and allow people to pull from that portal? If they're working at home and not in the LMS, they can go to the portal and there's a page right there. Click on the link to podcasts and they're right there available for them, just like they are in the LMS. We've continued to work through COVID just like everyone else. And it's been really interesting to see what's come of the podcast since we started. It's still fairly early. Again, as I mentioned, we really started in earnest in February. And so now we're into, as we talk now, beginning of June. When we first launched the LMS, in the first 2 weeks, we had 150 downloads of the podcast, different episodes. I was really excited about that from the standpoint that not having any type of content at all in this way, in this format, to in a matter of no time have 150 downloads, very pleased about that. When we announced the portal launch for the podcast, we had 25 downloads in the first hour. And I think it goes back to the idea that we have teammates out there looking to get more information and be communicating with them. They're on the platform, they're reading about other opportunities and other things that are going on. Suddenly, hey, there's this audio content that I don't really know about this particular topic. I can click on it, download it, or stream it and listen to it. And one of the most exciting things, and I find very flattering, is the requests that we're getting now to consider other content. How do we expand upon the human resources content that we started with, the safety content that we've put more focus on because of the pandemic, but how do we get into more conversation when it comes to culture, when it comes to leadership, and what are our leaders doing? How am I making sure that they're getting their stories across to the teammates that are out there? Because I think we all know that storytelling is so critical, be it in recruiting and anything that we do anymore. This is just another opportunity using this format from the podcast to be able to tell those stories of our teammates, the successes we've had, the things where we've missed the mark. How do we get better? So what have I learned? What have we learned when it comes to this podcast adventure that we've started? The first thing that I can tell you is that leadership buy-in and support is absolutely critical. if you go back to when we were talking about, what's your start? Why do you want to do this? Again, I've been incredibly fortunate from the standpoint that I've been doing this for a while, and I have a passion for it. I love the format, and that since I had a VP that listened and was excited about how do we translate that, I had that buy-in. I was able to go out and talk to some of the leaders that I work with that were aware that I podcast, that I talk about HR topics. They were excited about the idea of bringing that platform, bringing that model to our company. Again, we're in construction. It's not traditional, and I recognize that. And I've been really fortunate to have that buy-in. And then their support, the fact that they are cheering for us, they want it to do well and be successful. A lot of times you'll hear people need to hear your name at least 8 times. We talk about in marketing and recruiting, you got to hear it 8 times before they remember. And I find that that's been incredibly important when it comes to the podcast. I can't just communicate it once. When we started back in February, we sent out an initial email, came out from my VP saying, here's this new platform that we're using called the HR Pro. It's going to be on the LMS. We hope you'll listen to it, check it out. We're asking for feedback. But we did it that one time when we started. And I think the initial couple weeks, the download numbers that we had, we were very happy about. However, we didn't continue that. So we went a couple weeks. We didn't really talk much more about it. All of a sudden, COVID comes to the front. Now we decide to shift our communication model and talk more about safety. We start communicating about it again. And we sent out emails saying, hey, we've added podcasting and the HR Pro show to our employee portal. So if you weren't able to listen via LMS, go check it out on the portal. We actually added one of the episodes as a link or just an attachment. Here's an MP3. If you haven't listened to the podcast, one of our shorter ones, check it out because we really think you ought to be listening and taking part. Here's a way to do that. So making sure that you communicate often and in different ways. Again, it could be on your employee portal. It could be on your intranet. Maybe you have mailers that go out. And even talking about it on your podcast, reminding people to listen to other shows. It all helps to continue to build and boost the signal. And then finally, you have to ask for feedback. That can be a challenge for some people. And particularly if you're not, if as you get started and knowing, if we go back to those original numbers, we know roughly half of the population has heard a podcast. We know a portion of the population is listening to podcasts regularly. Some people are unfamiliar with the concept or the product. This may be the first time they listen to a show or get engaged in a show often. It's really critical to ask them, what do you think? How can we get better? Or are we missing content? Are there things that we aren't doing that we should be doing? So I think it's really important to consider those things. And I'm excited from the standpoint that, again, as we've just started in the last few months, the buy-in and the support has been tremendous. That we've started learning about the communications and how to do better and more and make it more consistent in that way. But again, asking for feedback, which is just something we started to do and started getting reply about what are people looking for. Because I think there's a lot of opportunity. I know there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I'm excited to see where we can go next and how can we continue to build this platform and the content that we have, continue to build episodes, continue to expand the content, the storytelling that we're doing. I just think there's a lot of tremendous opportunity there that I'm really, really excited about. I know there are probably going to be a lot of questions. I covered a lot fairly quickly. A lot of different ways to find me. You can contact me via email. If you're not familiar with my outside podcast or public podcast, the HR Social Hour Half Hour podcast is a show that I do with my co-host Wendy Daly, where we talk to people all around the HR world. We talk about, really focus on 3 things. We talk about giving back, building your network, if you're on Twitter, You can find me there at John Thurman on LinkedIn. Send me an invite. I love talking about these things. I'm happy to do it at any time. I wish you well. And Ben, thanks again for having me. Take care.
John, that was so fun. I really appreciate you for sharing your expertise there. And what I love about that is you are, I'd say this is a compliment to you. You would appreciate this. I know no one else take this as a dig at John, please, but he is a huge nerd, a huge geek, and he loves his podcasts. He didn't say it, but he also runs another podcast for fun outside of all the other stuff that he does for HR and his work and his day job, all those other volunteering things he does. He also runs another podcast with friends, kind of as a co-host, just as another side entertainment to focus thing, because that's what he loves. And I love seeing people really dive into something that they feel strongly about. And whether it's HR in this case, right, sharing how those podcasts can be used for your company, or in the other case, 80s pop culture and trivia and things like that. So it's so much fun to see you sharing that, John. Next up, we have Meg Mankey. She's going to talk to us about balancing accountability and empathy. So we've had that E word, empathy, come up a couple of times in the conversation in the last day, and probably I would imagine come up more over the coming couple of days. But I met Meg last year at an event. I got to hear her speak and just really appreciated her candor, her kind of straightforward approach. So she's going to jump in and talk to us about this. Meg, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Meg Mankey. I'm the COO and head of training for Rose Group International. We are actually headquartered in Western South Dakota, which is a lovely place to live for most of the year, especially spring and summer. It's really wonderful. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about balancing empathy and accountability in a new world. So we've had some crazy changes in the last couple of months, and it's really hard to think about how do you give people grace and also hold them accountable at the same time. It was already hard before, and now, you're thinking, well, there's new. I actually was just on a webinar, listening in on a webinar that was about new regulation or suggested regulation, or they might actually put some regulation into place about ADA compliance and FMLA. And so there's really a lot for the business leader to be balancing. So then to think of, on top of that, being nice to people. Are you kidding me? So we're going to talk a little bit about some proprietary ways that we help people, that we've created, that we share with the world to help people really think about understanding their team dynamics, seeing how people manage through change and helping them manage through change, and then also what attitudes, behaviors, and actions do you need to have in place in your workplace so that you can really excel going forward. I am not the queen of doing two things at once, and so if you see me making funny faces, it's because I'm trying to switch my slides. Just be really honest and upfront. It seems easier that way. Okay, so I'm a marathon runner. All of my races have been canceled this summer, so that's exciting. Still trying to train and run. It was already hard because you have to get up early in the morning. You're not supposed to eat the chocolate cake. You're supposed to do all this cross training. Chicken is dry no matter how you fix it. You can't convince me otherwise. I swear there's no good way to fix chicken. And now it's like, well, I'm kind of training for nothing. A virtual race, sure. Facebook has been a great way to sort of build a team in your own head, but it's still not that exciting. I'm really hoping, I've got a race actually that I'm hoping to truly run in St. George, Utah in October. But thinking right now about getting on an airplane seems kind of scary. So marathon training is brutal. So why do we do it? It's kind of miserable. Why do we do it? Well, it's the reward, really. It's the reward of knowing that individually, you have accomplished something incredible. 26 miles on your own feet is like a big deal, especially when you've include all the training leading up to it and all that dry chicken you had to eat. And the other part of it that's really incredible is having a team surrounding you. When you're on the trail and you're running, and there are people who are complete strangers who are saying, God, good job, keep running, keep running. These people are usually running by me. I'm not running by them, to be clear. And you're thinking in your head, I'm not doing a great job, but you're so sweet to say that, and it keeps you going. So it's really the reward that makes us do what we do. We crazy marathon runners. Well, business is the same way if you think about it. There's change in communications and culture. It's all brutal. And now we have this compounding. I want to work remotely. I want to come back to work. We have to stand 6 feet apart from each other. I can't wear a mask because I have a pre-existing health condition that prevents me from wearing a mask, but I still want to come to work. All of this crazy stuff is going on, and it makes you wonder, why don't I just join the gig economy? Why don't I figure out what I'm really good at and niche into it? And then I'm just going to do that thing. Remote stuff is awesome now. So there's so many more opportunities. It's welcomed in the business world. Maybe I'll just do that. But we don't think that, do we? Not very many of us. Well, why is it? Again, it's that reward. It's that being built into a team of incredible people is an opportunity that's amazing. You get to open doors for your clients, your patients, your customers, your employees. You get to help them create and plan and help raise their family. And it's so fulfilling to be part of a team and part of an organization. And that's really why we stay in organizations and we work so hard to understand each other and communicate well and have a healthy business and a healthy culture. But there's still a gap, isn't there, between what one person thinks is good or right and what another person thinks is good or right? If we were sitting all in a room together, I would actually have you help me with this exercise. But since we aren't, I'll just fake it. What does a perfect day look like? Raise your hand. Tell me a few things about a perfect day. Well, Meg, I like to start my morning off with coffee, and then I like to go for a run, or running people are crazy, so I'd rather sit and read a book, or I like to read the newspaper, and then I go to work, and all my emails are, even if there are some challenges and problems, things I can get solved, today or within the week. My phone isn't ringing off the hook if I don't want it to be. If I'm a salesperson, my phone is ringing off the hook because I do want it to be. People are getting along. I don't have to worry about managing arguments and problems in the workplace. I get to leave. This is another one that always comes up. I actually get to leave at a halfway reasonable time, whatever that means. And then we throw in the new things like, I can remote work, or I don't have to remote work, or I get to engage with my team, or whatever all those things are. Right? So there isn't anything that you couldn't be on board with, right? There might be things you don't like. Maybe you're not a coffee drinker, but you drink tea. Maybe you're not a runner, but you're a reader. That's fine. There isn't really anything on that list, though, that you think, I don't want that. That doesn't sound like a great day or a perfect day. No. So again, there's this mystery about the reward of working with people, but it's still really kind of hard to get everybody working together in the same direction, even though we all work in a business together, building the same widget. So we should really be on the same page about how to get things done. So what is the mystery, really? Whoopsie, I told you I can't do two things at once. What is the mystery? What is the root cause of that gap? We all have a similar idea of what a good day looks like at work, but we still have arguments or disagreements or uneasy feelings or conflict. Well, it's because we all see the world a little bit differently. And what we've created is a system called the culture type assessment. And the culture type assessment is a way for you as a business leader and a way for individuals to really understand the people they work with, the team around them. So what we do is look at these 4 different culture types. You take the assessment, look at the 4 different culture types. There are fixers, independents, stabilizers, and organizers. And the way we measure people is in understanding their chaos tolerance, right? So how open to things being or feeling out of your control are you really? Right? So that goes from chaos to order. And then we've got team driven to self driven. Do you prefer to make decisions in a team and collaborate together? The people you can imagine that if you are in an office building, or when you used to be in an office building, they run with a whiteboard marker into the conference room. They're so excited to have a big brainstorming session about this new idea. Those are our team driven folks. Our self-driven folks are really less likely to do that or be excited to communicate in that way. Self-driven people really have more of a propensity for making decisions on their own or thinking about how things work by themselves before they really go into a team meeting and talk about it. So that's a little bit about solving the mystery of that gap between people and our teams and understanding how teams work. And so when we talk about this with our clients, there's a slide for each one of these that I always seem to skip because I explained some of this already. So when we talk about this with our clients, they get this assessment with all their people on it. So they get to really see what the differences are and work preferences for people. This is not a personality type system. This is actually how do people like to work. What do they like about their work environment, and the people that they're working with and that are working around them. So you can see in this example, Kira, way down in the bottom right corner, it's not really in the corner, but in the bottom right quadrant, and Andy, who's way, I guess I should be doing this, Andy, who's way up here in the top left, they see the world very differently. Andy is a fixer, right? So he's team driven and chaos tolerant, and Kira is an organizer. She's self-driven and order tolerant. And you can imagine that those two people, because of the way they like to work, they were always upset with each other. And we had a great conversation and said, well, can we make some agreements between you two that would make your lives a little easier, make you more productive, and actually provide a healthier environment for your team? Because the reality is, and this is so true all the time, I'm sure as you know, two people not getting along can disrupt an entire team, right? So all of these other names on here, Dana, Kathy Jo, Trisha, Alyssa, Lindsay, Ashley, they were all disrupted by Andy and Kira's work preference differences. So we made some agreements, well, they made some agreements, and actually stuck to them. And it was incredible to see the immediate turnaround. So really bridging that gap where we all kind of want the same thing, we're working towards the same goals. The bridging that gap starts with understanding who's on your team and what their work preferences are, so you can really get it ingrained in your head and the way you communicate and the way you all work together, how people are different in their work preferences. How are they seeing what effective and productive work looks like? How do they imagine that it gets done the best way? And is that different than you? And if it's different than you, what kind of conversation can you have about what those differences are and how you can actually bring them closer together? Or if you can't bring them closer together, fine, pick one or the other and move on. But it's all about that, making agreements between people when there are differences. So the next thing there's some other samples in here. So this is a mostly stabilizer organization. This is a manufacturing. We find a lot of stabilizers in manufacturing because, as you can imagine, stabilizers like work to be consistent, and they're team driven, so they like to be around people. Consistent line work, stabilizer world. So I'm gonna skip through this. So the next thing I want to talk about is change. Anybody gone through any big changes recently? Anybody? No? No one? Just kidding. We've all been through huge, major, maybe like actually change the entire world forever a little bit kind of changes in the last several months. So let's talk about what change does to an organization. We're going to start with what change does to a person. So in change, there are certain things that happen all the time. We feel like it's just super chaotic and we don't know how to get our arms around it. Even people who are chaos tolerant feel that way if they haven't created the change for themselves. They feel like, yeah, I just am not really sure what's coming at me. I'm just going to be ready to dodge whatever. Right. And so it's kind of hard to imagine that actually change has a process, but it does. It has a process. So this is our Kurt's change transition model. And what happens is you can see on the screen, you're going along and life is normal and no one has coronavirus. And then the next thing you know, there's a change event. And maybe that change event is that someone you know had it, or you heard it on the news, or whatever the case is. And then you go into what we call decline. Decline is kind of a little bit like denial. You're kind of pretending like what's happening isn't really happening. And so you're sort of living your life as normal and trying to think about, what am I going to do next? Or maybe you're not even there yet. You're really just thinking about, how am I going to get back to what was happening over here in this normal section before this change event happened. And then you hit a point called let go. And when you let go, you actually go into innovation phase. And you start thinking about, well, I can't have what I had back there, so I have to let go of that. So what is the new future going to look like? If I think forward, what's going to happen next? And in innovation phase, whether it's actually testing or testing in our minds, all of the different things that could happen, and if that's good or bad. And some days, your energy is up, so you're like, oh, this is going to actually be really great for our business. Or then you have days where you think, this is abysmal, I might have to look for a new job, I really don't like what's happening right now. And you have some medium days and you kind of bounce back and forth until you get out to your new normal. And your new normal is really what you want to anchor yourself in. We talk a lot at Rose Group about letting go of what was and then anchoring in something in the future. What can you really hang on to in the future? What idea? Maybe it's a concept. Maybe it's a new product you're developing. What can you hang on to in the future that you can plan towards? Because that helps transition your brain from, I want that back there, to, okay, well, what's going to happen next over here? So what really is interesting is that each one of these types goes through change a little bit differently based on their work preferences, that chaos tolerant to order tolerant, team driven to self-driven. Those work preferences change how we really think about a change coming up in our lives, or a change that's just been thrown into our lives, which is usually what happens. So as you can see, fixers and independents don't even hardly have much of the decline. I'm going to flip back to this other screen really quick. They don't even really have a lot of this. It's just pretty much a straight line, and then they go into innovation phase. Well, you can imagine that those folks are chaos tolerant. And so for them, there's not a lot of, oh, I want to stick with what was. I like that really good. Most of the time, fixers and independents are already looking for something new. They can be kind of maddening in that way, because you're thinking, seriously, pal, are you trying to transition again? We just got this one thing figured out. And so when a fixer or an independent has a major change come into their world, they actually don't have much of a decline. But they do go into, I'm going to flip back to this other one, they do go into innovation phase pretty quickly. And when they go into innovation phase, they might be all over the place if you don't guide them well. So this is guided well, but we also have some graphics that show unguided change. And on those graphics, it's all over the place. Fixers in their innovation phase are there. One day they have an incredible day, the next day it's horrible. So you can think about fixers who are dragging the team around with them in this whirlwind of ideas, and no, that's a horrible idea. Yes, this is great. Oh, I might go get a new job. Fixers, innovation phase is pretty exciting for them. So a way you can guide fixers through innovation phase is to give them some scope. You say, well, here's what we really want to do. Here's what I want you to do as part of that. Here are the team of people and the resources that I'm going to give you to get through to the next point of whatever we're working on. That way, the fixer can still get super excited and have highs and lows within their innovation phase, but they don't just go off the charts and come to you with 3 new ideas, and you're thinking, no, we're not creating the next new ShamWow cloth. We're actually working on this other project, right? So you've had somebody who's kind of gone off the rails with ideas, and then they're like frustrated with you because, well, you're not paying attention to my ideas and you wanted me to be creative. Well, this is what happens when you don't provide someone who's chaos tolerant with a little bit of scope, particularly a fixer, because then they drag people with them because they're team driven. Independents don't have, you can see on the screen, independents don't have quite so much of a crazy innovation phase. It's still kind of got some wicked bumps and bruises in here, but it's not as crazy. That's because they're self-driven. They're not so interested in how things are impacting everyone else or what people think about what's going on with the change. They're pretty interested in sorting through that themselves, so they can kind of cut through the noise, or frankly, they sometimes, quite a lot, mute the noise altogether, and they're processing how things are going without listening to what other people are saying necessarily, not getting spun up about things going wrong. So an independent, what you want to do is, again, provide them with a little bit of scope, and then also give them a really good, juicy challenge, something that they can work on, maybe where they either don't need a team, or they might only need a small team of people, so they can just get really creative and be innovative and feel like they have control over that piece of it. That's how you really get an independent excited about a change. Organizers and stabilizers, you can see here, have actually a pretty good decline, stabilizers especially. And this is, as I pointed out earlier, this is change guided well. Most of the time we don't guide change well, and that can get really ugly because stabilizers can just stay in this decline forever because they don't have enough information to move forward. So remember, organizers and stabilizers are order tolerant. They like to have information so they can create a plan, an agenda, an approach, a process, a policy, whatever name you want to put to it. They want to be able to create a structure around the chaos. And so if you don't give them enough information, it's really hard to get them to let go of what was and think forward to what could be. It's really important then with organizers and stabilizers that you share information with them up front. They like to do what I call their homework up front in that decline phase. So they're not going to let go of what was. They're going to hang on to it, but they're going to listen to what you're saying. Okay, yep, yeah, okay, taking that in. And then they're going to get to the point where they're ready to let go. Right? So we're here at the let go phase for each of them, and then they'll go into innovation phase. Now they actually have a pretty small innovation phase because they've done their homework up front. They don't really feel excited about going and having all these wild and crazy ideas. They've already done their sort of idea making, idea sharing up front, and then when they get to innovation phase, they're like, okay, yep, gotcha, we're good to go, and then they go out to new normal. So this is how you can start thinking about the culture types in your organization. If you were going to do the assessment, you'd have those, and then you would have information. If you get the book, we have a book called IX Leadership, which is available on Amazon in all 3 versions, hard copy, Audible, and Kindle. And so in the book, it talks in greater detail actually about these. And so understanding those culture types, bridging that gap between people's work preferences, and then really getting into understanding how people are processing change, that gets you a long ways in knowing how to be empathetic and hold people accountable. Because we are running a business, accountability, but we understand that humans are humans, and everybody comes to work with their own bag of things. Right? And so we have to, as leaders, figure out how to understand how those people are processing that so that we can help them through it faster. That's what understanding people's culture types and the Kurtz Change Transition Model is all about. How can we better leverage the energy of our people and keep energy up, and decrease or shrink the amount of time it takes people to get through a change in terms of how they process it. So let me see here. So this is, as you can see, an example of change left unguided and change guided well. So you can really shrink down that amount of time that it takes people to get through a change. So even, and this is a fixer. Fixers are chaos tolerant and they're team driven. They get lots of data and information from other people, and then they process it and they get out to that new normal because they're ready to let go of whatever was that doesn't bother them. So you can see that even with those people on your team, you can really, really impact the amount of time it takes for them, and the effectiveness they can have during a change if you guide them well, instead of just leaving it unguided. We're ready to let go. We at Rose Group and whoever's listening, ready to let go of that. Well, change is hard. We're just going to have to, buckle down and get through it. It's not going to be better. It's just going to get worse. And then it'll probably get better someday. We're going to lose people. That is not the way to manage change for people. That's not the attitude to have. It's certainly not the attitude we have. So we like to help people change their attitude about change. I'm getting a note. I, again, can't do two things at once. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is really, okay, how do you do these things? So if I'm seeing that there are some differences on my team, and I know I've learned about how to process change, how I process change, how other people are processing change, how can I then actually use this information in my business to either redefine the culture that I have, or maybe just bolster some parts of it. So when we talk about your culture, we have our book is actually talks about creating high five cultures, which apparently now is going to be a high elbow or maybe just nothing at all, air five. Maybe in the second version of the book, we'll just call it creating an air five culture. So in terms of creating that culture, we just talk about little tweaks, right? A lot of times organizations think, or when you're thinking about our employee morale is kind of bunk right now. People aren't really excited about working here. Our turnover keeps creeping up. I don't really feel great about being at work. Other people have said they don't. We're not really sure what happened. When you're in that situation, it's easy to think, oh my gosh, we have to do something huge. Something really big has to happen because this is a big problem. It's a big deal. It's going to take big changes. The reality is that, in fact, it doesn't take big changes. It takes little tweaks about important little things that are happening within your organization. So we talk about those tweaks in terms of three different things: attitudes, behaviors, and actions. So what attitudes do you have in your organization right now that are great? We split them out between accountability and empathy. So what accountability attitudes do you have that are awesome? What empathy attitudes do you have that are awesome? And what ones are you maybe not so good at? And which ones do you aspire to be better at? Or maybe there's some in there that you don't pay any attention to at all. And we have 22 of those attitudes that we look at. So when you look at those attitudes, some of them are grace is an empathy one, and we'll pick accountability, ownership, right? So let's say you want to get better at people having ownership and people having a little bit of grace. Well, what things then we go into behaviors? Okay, what behaviors have to happen in order for us to be better as an organization? Or maybe it's a team. Maybe you just have one department that struggles with these things. So what behaviors do they have to start using? What do we need to start seeing differently in our organization? And that is for grace. It could be certain things like maybe asking clarifying questions. Maybe it's not mumbling after somebody talks every time. And for ownership, it could be things like checking in more often, whether that's the leader checking in with the employees or vice versa, or all of it together. So you start thinking about those behaviors, and then you work on the actions. What actions do you put in place? Emails, calendar invites, Zoom calls is going to be a thing now for a while, probably. What things do you need to do to make sure that that really happens? And so that's really how we think about creating a high five, air five culture. understanding the gap between people's perspectives, really helping folks manage their change well, maintaining productivity and maintaining morale. And then what actions do you really need to take based on the attitudes and behaviors you have currently so that you can create this new world that you really are looking for in your organization. So thank you all for listening. This has been really a wonderful, great time. I hope that I have shared some good information with you. And if you have any questions, I'm sure the folks with this fine organization are going to put my contact details somewhere. So you can always reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks. Take care.
And yes, that was so much fun hearing from Meg there. As you can tell, I love, number one, I get called out for the accent often. I'm the Southern guy, right? I get to call it for the accent, but I love hearing her accent as well from the Dakotas, and her sharing about why empathy matters. I love there were some great comments, people identifying, well, I'm the fixer. No, I'm the, all over the place. All of us have a different thing we bring to the workplace in that regard too, in terms of our personality and our approach to work. And that's just fun to see people kind of figure out where they are and help understand how we can work with other people. So phenomenal. Thank you, Meg, for that. Tracy Spangenberg is up next. And she is actually going to share with us about trust, about confidence, about risk taking. And what I like is her story is a great example of what we heard from Steve today. She talked about Steve talked about connecting with others, being intentional about that. And Tracy's story, she shares about how that's part of her bigger career journey, her career story. And I think you'll enjoy hearing her share that. So here we go with Tracy.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, I'm Tracy Spangenberg. I'm the Chief People Officer for the Granite Group, and we're a wholesaler based in Concord, New Hampshire. We're located throughout New England, and we sell toilets, and I'll talk maybe a little bit about that. But what I really wanted to talk about today is a lot about my experience and in my personal journey, but more specifically about how you can succeed in your HR career by using some skills and competencies we don't talk about often enough, and those are trust, confidence, networking, and risk taking. So what we'll cover is just exactly what we talked about here. Trust, confidence, network, and risk taking, and why this is necessary for your career. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about the SHRM BOK. And if you're familiar with SHRM, you're probably familiar with this. And I know that different organizations have different groups of competencies, but I like to explain this one because it pretty easily covers the different behavioral competencies, the technical competencies, and the HR functional areas that are necessary for you to have a strategic mindset, which eventually will hopefully lead to a successful business outcome. But the things we'll talk about aren't necessarily covered there, and maybe are some of the soft skills that are really, really important to succeed. And before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my own personal journey. And I'm an introvert. I talk about that a lot. And my only tell is that you can see when I'm presenting, really, I get very red in the neck. Aside from that, most people don't realize that it's actually very difficult for me to do this. So I lived really firmly in that small, tiny circle, that comfort zone circle, for almost my entire life. And then it took me a really long time to realize that everything good happened outside of that comfort zone. So I'll share a few different things that happened to me throughout this, but my journey really began about 7 years ago, when for me, my transformation was physical and mental. And I took care of my physical health. I took care of my mental health. I started to exercise. I ate better. I lost weight. And that helped with my confidence. It helped with a lot of things. And really, I started to put myself out there more. And 4 years ago, just about 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to co-present at a talk. I had never spoken in public before, but I had the opportunity to co-present. I had a chance to say yes or no. Every other chance I had in my life, I had said no. But for some reason that time, I said yes. And that led to one thing that led to another thing that led to another thing. And that was really led to me living in that larger circle where the magic happens. Not all the time. My life isn't magic all the time, but that's really what I wanted to focus on now, because I do talk to a lot of people as I do speaking engagements, and I talk to a lot of people who are very firmly living where I was living and really don't think they can go from here to there, and it's really totally possible. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about today is trust. Now, for me, I'm a chief people officer. I report to the CEO. You may be, but you may not be, but you probably do have a boss, and you definitely have a company culture. And for me, that relationship between me and my boss, me and my CEO, there's nothing more important to me in the company, in my choice to take a position, to move on. And that's because I really need to make sure that the person that I'm working for has the best interest of the company in mind, has the best interest of the people in mind, even above that, and that it's someone I can like and trust and respect. And I feel like if I could do that, I'm in the right place. And I've been very fortunate to have that over the years. So trust isn't just there. Generally, it's not. Some people are very trusting and you automatically get their trust. But essentially, trust is earned. And I found this article from the Trust Edge Leadership Institute that talked about how to build trust, and I really liked it. It's the 8 C's: clarity, compassion, character, competency, commitment, connection, contribution, and consistency. And it is really important that, for me anyway, to understand that I didn't just get trust. So my current job is my 3rd job in a row, I believe, where I followed someone who had been terminated. The previous HR leader had been terminated. So I walked into a situation where there was already a lack of trust, and I not only had to build my own trust, but I had to overcome that. And how I did that was be really patient, which doesn't necessarily come naturally to me, but I was patient. I visited all of our locations. At the time, we had about 30. We have about 45 now. I listened to people. I talked to people. I followed through. I listened some more. I told the truth, even when it was not something someone wanted to hear. And I was just generally there for people. And that really gave me the chance to build trust, build relationships, know that somebody could count on me if they needed me. And that was not only with our people, but that was with my boss too. And that's something that I strive to do even now. And now that I've been at the company almost 5 years, when we aren't going out and visiting all of our locations, it allowed me to continue those relationships, even though I'm not able to see everybody face to face right now. So it's earned. You don't just get that. So confidence is something that I like to talk about a lot, because it's something that I really, really, really struggled with for a long time. And I love this this quote by Priyanka Chopra Jones. I taught myself confidence when I'd walk into a room and feel scared to death. I tell myself, I'm not afraid of anybody. And people believe me. You've got to teach yourself to take over the world. And I really believe that that's true. This is about 4 years ago. Again, I told you my journey was long, and this is something that's really been a challenge for me. But about 4 years ago, I remember walking into a room at a conference that was it was a networking event. And I had never been there before. It was my first time. It was an industry event. It was a woman in industry event. And I grew up with a football player father, football coach father. I grew up with a brother, and I grew up with a lot of guys. So it was a little bit harder to walk into a room full of women, because I kind of felt I could talk about football a little easier than I could talk about some other things. So I walked in. I didn't know a soul. And I walked right out and went back to my hotel room and just sat there for about a half hour. So, and I did a little bit of this. I just talked to myself and said, hey, just get back out there. What's the worst that could happen? And I found someone who looked equally miserable, and I attached myself to them and ended up hanging out with them at the same conference for the next several years. And eventually I grew more and more comfortable and more confident. When it comes to the workplace, I love this quote from Elvis. So there's no job too immense when you got confidence. I'm not quite sure if that's actually from a song or not. So some changes at work can help, certainly. There's some things that we can do as employers to help boost confidence. There's some things that you can do to help boost your confidence at work. But largely, those changes come from within you. So largely confidence, even in the workplace, is going to come from changes from within yourself. Again, I mentioned that this was a real struggle area for me. I constantly worried about what people thought. And I see this a lot in other people. And I want to talk a little bit about how I overcame that. And I didn't necessarily read this Forbes article, but I found this is really, really, really helpful. So get things done. So if you're doing things at work or in life, if you're moving forward in your life and your career, that can really help you create a sense of achievement to move forward and to feel more confident. And I loved this article because it wasn't necessarily an article for your personal confidence. It was geared toward business, but anyone can take these things and apply them in life. Monitor your progress and ask for feedback if that's appropriate. So how are you doing with work, with life? Check in on that. Do the right thing. We have a saying at the Granite Group, and I'm sure this is not dissimilar to a lot of other companies and the sayings that they have, but we say do the right thing always. And that's how we run our business. And that's how I run my life. I try to remember to always do the right thing. And that helps me in the back of my mind. And sometimes I use a gut check with my husband, and I call him my moral compass. So if I'm never sure what to do, I use him as my double check because he seems always sure. Exercise. This may not seem businesslike, but there's a lot of stories that you can read about a lot of successful people who exercise every morning. And this is true for me. I start every weekday with exercise without fail. I think unless I've been super, super sick. And then I try to fit it in during the day. But for me, it helps set my mind going forward. And since I lost all that weight and got healthy, I've been doing that every single day. And that's whether I'm traveling, whether I'm here. For me, that has been critical to my overall physical well-being, my mental health, and certainly my confidence, and not just in outward appearance changes, but just as much in my mental changes and my mental health changes. And be fearless. This is really hard. This is really hard to wrap your head around when you're reading an article about confidence, but being fearless and being bold, and we'll talk a little bit more about risk-taking later, being fearless and being bold can go a long way to helping your confidence, especially as you're doing these things. You're either going to be fearless, be bold, go forward and achieve something, or you're going to be fearless, be bold, go forward and fail, and then you'll learn something. So either way, it's going to teach you something and it's going to help your confidence. And stand up for yourself. This is something I was also terrible at. You need to be your own self-advocate in work, in life, and that's really critical. It's important to have allies and friends and colleagues, but you need to stand up for yourself as well. Follow through. I talked about that with my team, that this is really critical for us at the Granite Group, that we need to do what we say we're going to do. Over the past couple of months, our CEO has communicated every single day, and he does that by video and by email, communicates to all 600 of our people, and he gets a lot of comments and a lot of questions back directly to him, and he responds to each and every single one, and he follows through and he does what he says he's going to do, and I try to take that and model that behavior in my own life. And think long term. So if you have long-term goals, you lay out a path for yourself, that can help you toward your path toward confidence. It's much easier said than done, not caring what others think, but truly, it really is necessary for your self-confidence. So, and I like to think of it this way. I care what others think. I care that people think that I'm a good human being. I care that people think that I am doing the right thing. I care that people think I'm doing a good job. I don't care if people don't like me. I don't worry if I'm doing the right thing and I'm doing my job and I'm doing a good job and I'm caring about others and I'm being a good human. If people then couldn't care for me, I don't care about that. So that did take me a while to get to that point. So that's really how I interpret that. And then do more of what makes you happy. And I think this might be the most important part of this whole article. And if you're not happy and if you don't feel good, it's really hard to feel confident and it's really hard to help others. And if you're an HR professional, it's really hard to do your job. And I talk to people all the time who don't take the time to learn and don't take the time to grow. And the fact that you're here and you're watching this and that you're taking part in this great program, then you're doing something to help yourself and to help yourself grow. And that is absolutely critical. Like I said, I talk to people all the time and say, I don't have time to do this. And you really don't have time not to do that. It's very, very important for your health and your happiness. So networking is something that's really near and dear to my heart because I absolutely hated it for years and years and years and years. So for the vast majority of my career, I would avoid every company dinner, every party. I'm, again, introvert, so I don't tend to like parties, but I just would avoid it. And when I first started my career, those business after hours things that still go on were everywhere. And I think I went to one or two early on, ended up leaving pretty quickly. And it wasn't my thing. And so that's how I interpreted networking. And that's really, truly how I did. So I had a real small circle of colleagues and friends. I still have a small circle of friends. And I didn't really understand what networking was. A few years ago, I went to HR Tech. That presentation that I mentioned earlier gave me the confidence to then apply to speak at HR Tech. And that was a solo talk, my first solo talk a few years ago on HR technology. And it went great. I had a great time at the event by myself. And then I happened to one day run into Mary Kaler from SHRM as I was coming out of the elevator. And she introduced me to a lot of people, including Ben, including Aaron Spencer, including a lot of people that I had followed online that I never thought I would really meet in person. And that kind of tied in things for me that we'll talk about risk, we talk about networking, confidence. That really kind of brought that all in. So having that one person who would kind of go out of their way for you and introduce you to people and help give you that push that you needed, that was really critical to me to meeting people in person. So I'll talk a little bit about the online, but that really pushed me firmly out of my comfort zone. It really helped me move forward in my networking. Again, this was just a few years ago, and it really helped me think that maybe I should be doing this kind of stuff on my own. And if you need to know why networking is important, roughly 85% of jobs are filled through networking. And that's a statistic by LinkedIn. 85% of jobs, and the majority of those won't ever be advertised. So one of the greatest joys in my life now is connecting people to other people and connecting to people who may be looking for jobs, to people who may have jobs, and I get an immense amount of joy out of that. And I wouldn't be involved in that at all if I hadn't been networking. And these are just some of the ways, these are the in-person ways that I enjoyed networking. And there are pictures here from a customer dinner and from conferences and from teaching and from different events. And these things have brought people into my life that I would never have met before. And that was just from getting out of my comfort zone, gaining the confidence to move forward to do these things, let alone taking selfies, which I would have never done until relatively recently. It's really been invaluable to me. So I love this slide because it shows the vast amount of networking opportunities that are available. And I think, gosh, I've been on LinkedIn for maybe about 10 years, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I started to be a little bit active on that. So I would occasionally write an article, and then I would maybe share something, just share a Harvard Business Review story or something somebody else wrote. And then I started to get a little bit more comfortable, and I'd write little things, or I'd share something our company was doing, or I would write another article myself. And then I started to meet people via LinkedIn and make connections and develop friendships, which was absolutely crazy to me just even a few years ago. But that really happened on Twitter too. So I would, again, Mary helped me get active into Sherm's Next Chat, which helped me meet people on Twitter. That if you told me a few years ago that I would meet people online that I would consider friends, I would have told you you were absolutely nuts. But they've been critical to my growth and my development and my learning and my life. So it has really been a life-changing thing for me to get myself out there and get into networking. Facebook groups have been great. They've been really helpful for my career and from helping my company. And Instagram is something I got into just because of my kids, but that's been fun too. And certainly I love in-person conferences when you can do them. Virtual conferences I've been doing more of. Those have been fun and a great source of learning for me. And now in the past few months, we've seen people get really creative with different events like virtual coffees. And I try to do that as much as I possibly can, meet people for a coffee online or a virtual lunch. And that's been really fun since a lot of us are scattered throughout the country and can't get together in person. And Twitter chats are another source for me. And I can't emphasize this enough. I've done a number of talks on HR technology over the past couple of years. And every time I do them, I ask the HR professionals in the audience who's on Twitter. And usually maybe 2% of the hands are raised. So it's a very small group. Now that assumes that people are actually going to raise their hands. That assumes a lot of things, but it's normally a very small group of people who are actively involved in Twitter. And I think that really would be great if that changed. I'd love to see more HR professionals putting themselves out there. It took me a very long time, but I'm so very glad that I did. I love this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, do one thing every day that scares you. I don't know that I do that. I try to, but I'm very risk averse by nature, extremely risk averse. So again, like to live in my little bubble of a comfort zone. But I have found that over the years that taking a risk is really necessary to me in my career. Over the past couple months, as we've all been dealing with things that we never thought we'd be dealing with before, I find myself having to make split decisions dozens of times a day. And if I didn't have the confidence, if I hadn't had the support team that I had, I wouldn't be able to do that. But that's a risk. That is definitely a risk. And let's talk a little bit about that. So risks involve uncertainty and change. If you're uncomfortable with risk, you're probably uncomfortable with change. I like to say that I love change in my business life. I hate it in my personal life. So I thrive to some degree, which is kind of weird, but in chaos and change in business, because I feel like I can go in and fix things. My personal life, I don't love it. And that's been an evolution for me. And the elimination of risk is a guarantee of failure. Risk takers are in the minority. So if you do take a risk, then you are really positioning yourself for success. And risk takers are happier. And this is from an article from Entrepreneur Magazine. So this again was an evolution for me, but as I realized it was really necessary for success, and I watched friends take risks, I slowly tried to do that myself. And I have a good friend who is very encouraging in that way. And I have to pull her back a little bit, and she pushes me forward a little bit. And I think that's really critical in all of our lives. So why is all of this necessary? Why do we take risks? Why do we need to be confident? And here's why. So you cannot have a solid relationship without a foundation of trust. And that goes for whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's a professional relationship, any kind of relationship. If you don't have trust as the foundation of that relationship, you really don't have a relationship at all. So in order to help your company succeed, you need to speak up and you need to know what you're doing, and you do know what you're doing. So you need to find your confidence. I talk about this a lot. Networking is simply everything. You want to embrace people who can help you, and you help them, and help them without asking for anything in return. Every decision carries risk. Try to make more good ones than bad. My husband talks about this all the time. He talks about life is just a series of decisions, and you want to make more good ones than bad. And I think for me, tend to be risk averse, tend to be slow to make a decision. That's something that I've had to really work to overcome and to move myself forward in my career. And I loved this model here, that it's a world-class CHRO model. And this is meant to be very aspirational from Gartner, but it is a really good depiction of if you are moving up in your career and you aspire to be at that CHRO or the CPO level, these are the kind of things that you need. Be a functional business leader, business acumen, and business strategy development. And then all of these 5 pillars, leader of human capital, creator of talent strategy, enterprise change leader, driver of culture and purpose, and trusted advisor and coach. And in order to really work your way into all of these, and not every leader just kills it in all of these categories, but in order to work your way into all of these, you really need to be a risk taker. You really need to be a networker. You certainly need to be confident, and you really need to be a champion and a builder of trust. And I love to end this way. It's really all about the people. All that we do every day as HR professionals, it's all about our people. It's all about our teams. And it's all about each other. So if you'd like to reach me, you can reach me anytime by email, on Twitter. That's a website. That's a list the different things that I am doing. And then my LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you as well. So thank you.
Wow, goodness gracious. I'm loving this. I am having so much fun. I am mentally exhausted. Got about everything that I have. It's like I'm running out of room up there. So I've got time for one more fireside chat. And this will be a fun conversation, a way to cap the day off. Again, this agenda was planned weeks in advance. So have Julie and Torin up next. They are professionals. They have day jobs, but they also run a podcast on the side. It's fun because John was here today. He did both. A lot of us dual hats. Torin and Julie run a podcast called Crazy and the King. They focus on D&I, equity at work, those issues. And so I said, hey, I've got an idea for you. Would you be willing to participate in this kind of video live session of this? And they said, absolutely. So they let me participate with them, ask them some questions, just engage with them on this topic. And I'm excited to wrap this one up, and then a couple closing announcements before we get out of here for the day. School is almost out of session. Hang tight. Hey everyone, welcome back to HR Summer School. We are going to have an action-packed fireside chat coming right up with Torin Ellis and Julie Sowash. Make sure I got your name right in a minute, Julie. You might recognize them though. They're the co-hosts of the popular podcast Crazy and the King, and you can find that if you haven't seen it before. I highly encourage you to go check it out. crazyandtheking.com. I'll make sure and get that link in the comments here so you can go check that one out. So I reached out to them recently and said, hey, here's the pitch. Come on, do a live session, video session of Crazy and the King. And they were immediately in with both feet. So Julie, Torin, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, well, when you say popular, you know, me and Jay, we smile because when you say popular, Joe Rogan just signed a deal for $100 million for his podcast. So I don't necessarily know how popular Crazy and the King is, but we love doing it together.
We are on our way. Joe Rogan, right. We'll get there.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Someone actually told me one time, like, hey, I listened to your podcast and Joe Rogan. I'm like, why? Like that's like as far as the opposite end of the spectrum as you can get, but like, to each his own. But I mentioned you before we started recording, though. I'll give you this credit: people that are passionate about the things they care about, that they're getting a chance to speak about, like it's hard to shut them up. So like, keep doing what you're doing. It's good work, and people appreciate it that are listening. So I'll give you that. So just to introduce the audience to you, each of you a little bit more. Julie, you want to start us off? Tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. My name is Julie So Wash, like so wash and so clean. It's a tough one for some reason. And I am not only the co-host of Crazy and the King, but I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit called Disability Solutions. And we help big companies and companies of all sizes build strategy, kind of like an RPO sort of take on recruiting and branding, and specifically in the disability community. So we've helped over the last several years companies hire over 2,500 people with disabilities, and we're growing that every day. We're working with about 30 different brands, and I'm really excited to see where we continue to go and to continue this podcast with my partner here.
Awesome. Very cool. How about you, Torin?
Yeah, love Julie. We enjoy doing what we do. Torin Ellis, diversity strategist, risk mitigator, host of Career Mix on SiriusXM, of course, co-host on Crazy and the King. I'm non-judgmental, but I'm definitely prescriptive, and so I absolutely care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and I do that with zero apology.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I'm going to dive right in. I have a question. Based on what one of the other speakers was saying. We were kind of kicking around how things are going to change after all this craziness we're living in right now, all the chaos and everything else, how things are going to change. And one of the things that he said was his hope was that going forward, employers might be more inclusive in their hiring processes, reaching communities they couldn't reach before, because we are now operating in a more virtual environment. And if that sticks, if that remains sticky into how companies are doing things, his hope was that might open things up to hiring individuals with disabilities that have a hard time maybe getting to work and commuting, or people that might have an issue pulling those things off, or people that are in communities where like, hey, it costs me too much to try to get in, or I don't own a car, like all those variables we could pick at for a while. But his hope was that. And I want to hear your take on that. Is that overly optimistic, or might there be a chance that actually can happen?
Jay?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a pessimist, so I guess I'll blanket with that. I think it is, the opportunity is certainly there. And what I think is smart companies who are thinking long-term, who are thinking strategically, will take this opportunity to better leverage the disability talent pool in ways that they haven't before. I think what's going to be easy is to slip back into our old habits. But really what the world has seen in the last 9 to 10 weeks is that it's not people with disabilities' inability to work or inability to be successful in your workplace. It is your workplace's inability or lack of desire, sometimes refusal, to make the workplace fit for everyone. And when the entire world became disabled, air quotes, by a pandemic, companies were quickly, right, within a matter of days or weeks, to be able to transition their workforce out to their homes. So it's not a valid reason for a company to say anymore, we can't do work at home, we can't do flex schedules, we can't do those things. But that also being said, it's important to remember that people with disabilities are as different as the three of us sitting here on this call, on this Zoom. I'm a person with mental illness. I thrive in a workplace where I get to be at home, where I have flexibility, much more so than at the office. But we have other people that we have helped get jobs in the companies that we work at that are actually struggling right now because they need that interaction, they need that structure. And so it's about finding a place for all of us, and not kind of overarchingly thinking that now I can do this or now I can't do that, when it's really just that person and that hire and making that happen. But we do have the opportunity.
Yeah, that question is a bit of a gift and a curse, Ben. I would say that when I looked at Gender Avenger last week, their newsletter highlighted a conference by the Washington Post. That conference took place on the 19th, 20th, and the 21st. They had 3 different sessions. It was about pathway out of post or out of this pandemic. They talked about leadership. They talked about travel and tourism. They talked about hospitality, and I forget the other subject matter that was there. But all of the presenters for all 3 days, straight white men. So gift and a curse. Curse is we got to make sure that we understand exactly what needs to be evaluated. And I think the challenge for too many organizations is that they've just not had an honest conversation. They've not really assessed and looked at where they are in terms of their D&I efforts. I'm not penalizing the Washington Post or saying that they did such in a way that is counter to diversity and inclusion. However, that's not a good look. That ain't good representation. And so if we're going to move forward, I would hope that all organizations decide that they want to take a posture of honesty. Let's take a true evaluation of where our organization is, what are our deficiencies and gaps, and how do we move forward. The optimistic side, the gift side of this is if in fact they do that, then they can be true to what they say around we understand and believe that diversity is a critical value for our organization.
I think it would be interesting to just know from the listeners and the audience, what are they seeing in terms of how things are shifting? What do they want to hold on to? What do they want to get rid of? What's going to be a part of the past? And really start to build on those conversations so we can see what best practices are emerging.
Absolutely. I love you saying that because I interviewed someone the other day and we're talking about this. He said, you know what I don't get? We are talking about this loss of the workplace right now, this like it's something terrible. He said there were lots of things that were really crappy about it in the first place. Why are we mourning that? We should be
Yes.
so thankful. We should be celebrating those pieces of that we've given up and looking at this as the chance to say, okay, let's reframe this, let's reset this, because when things are comfortable in their normal routine, it's really hard to do what Jordan was just saying, right? It's hard to say, okay, we're going to take this. We've always said it, but now we're actually going to do it. And that's much harder to do in the moment when you've got this momentum. Suddenly this has broken all of that momentum. There's no inertia keeping you going that path. It's a chance to potentially take that step.
Absolutely. And we really do have inertia. We have momentum. We have the velocity behind us. And Julie and I have talked about this on the podcast, and we continue to talk about it. Organizations made a very quick shift. I am amazed at how many companies were able to turn the corner and really set up shop in less than a week. And in less than a week. And then over the last 8 weeks or so, organizations have, for the most part, been running smoothly. Why not take this opportunity to say, look, we're going to do something different so that we can be that future of work that we have talked about over the last 5 years.
And something else that we talked about, Torrin, not too long ago is just sort of also societally how this shifts when we have entire swaths of the population that can work at home, right? Because they are in skilled positions, they are in office positions, whatever that dynamic that allows that to happen. And then we have essential workers and those that are in more general labor that have to go into the office. They have to physically be there. And I think it creates sort of this divide that's going to be easy for those of us that sit in an office to kind of further discount what's really important about the value of the labor that's being provided in those physical locations. And I think that is going to be a big D&I challenge for leaders as they go forward in creating the understanding of the value that each member of the team brings to the workforce, and not just being a part of that cog that makes the food or makes the engine, but is a valuable part of what they offer to society, but also what they offer to the organization. I think that's already lost, and it could be worse now. We really have to start proactively thinking about it.
Do you think that this shift in the lens of late, where people are saying, hey, thank you to those who are working in fast food, delivering groceries, doing all the things right now, those people were kind of under the radar before, or you didn't see them in your daily work. You got your coffee and you went on, but now people are sort of putting a lens on them saying, hey, thank you for what you're doing. We appreciate everyone, whether you're a nurse, caring for someone, or you're someone who's out there in the thick of things on the front lines, just trying to keep everybody else supported. Do you think that's going to help with that sort of reframing, or is that just a neutral? It's just a fact of the change right now.
Sure, go ahead.
Jay, Ben, I don't see that as being significant. I'm absolutely appreciative that people are recognizing frontline individuals, no matter what industry sector that they are coming from. But quite frankly, that's exactly what the issue has been with D&I. People have gone so far or so much so unrecognized. They have been underrepresented. They have been unspoken of. They have not been pursued intentionally. They've been discounted, if you will, and I can keep going with adjectives. So, that's not one of the traits that I want to highlight. The bottom line is, yeah, now you see them. I'm glad about it, but, just be a human. It's nothing wrong with seeing people that are on the front line and respecting those individuals and making sure that we are challenging pay inequity, pay inequality, providing the resources, the support. I mean, at the time of this recording, you have all of the organizations now looking at pulling back the extra pay that they are giving to the front line. Why? We're not in any way out of this event. We're not even close. So why are we pulling back the extra $1 or $2 that you are giving people? I think about that. I mean, it absolutely makes no sense. And certainly I can't get in the pockets of these corporate leaders, but I'm willing to bet that all of them can afford to pay the people what they're paying them right now.
Yep.
That reminds me, there's a book somewhere on that shelf back there. I can't pick it out right now in the middle of this, but the book is The Frontline Leader. And one of the things that he advocates is in the book is the executive flyby is a terrible idea, right? And you're talking here like this flyby where we're looking at them and saying, hey, thanks. And then you forget they ever existed 6 months from now. And that's the challenge with not just D&I broadly as a category we're trying to attack, but also just in the day-to-day. When you're going to just look at them and pass by them and never come back, you shouldn't have stopped by in the first place. Don't even look at me if you're going to take that attention away and act like I was never here when this is all said and done.
Yeah, I think I would, in this case, I guess maybe I'm not as pessimistic as Torrin. I absolutely agree with what he said. I think the opportunity is to recognize, just like any other thing that we do in life as humans, whether we celebrate Black History Month or International Women's Day, Autism Speaks, that kind of, those celebration months, when you do it once a year, once in a while, it doesn't mean anything. So just like Veterans Day, we can wave our flags and do our thing. And the rest of the year we go around ignoring those individuals and those groups. And so this is the opportunity for a reset, to say that we do recognize this value and to have TA, HR, business leaders, and D&I leaders come together and say, how do we continue to recognize that value? And it has to start with pay, and it has to start with benefits. It also has to do with having conversations and setting morale. And so I do think there's an opportunity. Will we leverage it? I don't know, but I think the smart companies will.
Excellent. I love that. And I'm glad that you're hopeful, at least somewhere in here, Julie. Come on. I had to have a little bit of optimism. But that's one of the things I'm trying to bring to this. I'm picking on you, but I agree with you. I'm overly optimistic sometimes to my own detriment. So I'm thankful that someone brings you back to reality sometimes. I'm glad Torrin's not afraid to speak the truth, right? I'm glad that you're both out there on the proverbial front lines of HR, telling us, helping us, guiding us, giving us insight, and pushing us when we get a little too comfortable to think about things in a broader perspective. So
let me jump in real quick, Ben.
Yes,
when you say speaking the truth, I think about our dear friend Chris Fields, who has passed away. And for a couple of years, he worked on trying to build a speakers bureau. And he would reach out to individuals, or individuals would reach out and say, well, hey, we want Torrin to come and speak. However, we don't know if we're really ready for him to tell the truth. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to tell the truth. Julie and I are going to continue to tell the truth, whether people like it or not. The bottom line is we have not done enough as it relates to D&I, equity and belonging, and we're going to continue to push forward. We are sitting days away from LGBTQ Pride Month. The question becomes, what are organizations going to do to help celebrate those individuals that are inside of their workplace? What are they going to do? What policies do they need to look at? How are they going to make sure that benefits exist for those individuals to make them feel comfortable in the workplace when they do decide to return? And certainly, how can we make those individuals feel like they belong in a remote posture? So the question is not whether or not Torrin is going to speak the truth. The question is what you're going to do when he does such.
Oh, goodness. That's a good challenge for us to wrap up on. I like that. So if someone wants to connect with you, Torrin, we'll start with you. If someone wants to connect with you too, I've already mentioned crazyandtheking.com, the podcast there. Torrin, what's the best way to reach you personally?
So first, I want to say thanks again for trusting my voice on your HR Summer School. Yes, you can find me across all of social media at Torrin Ellis, across all of social media at Torrin Ellis.
Awesome. Thank you. And Julie, how about you?
Same thing, Julie Sowash on all socials, SOWASH. And you can find our organization at disabilitytalent.org. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I really appreciate both of you for taking some time. Again, speaking the truth, both of you, sharing, encouraging people. I appreciate what you're doing. Please do not stop. Keep it up. To everyone else, make sure you check out their podcast, follow them online, and also stay tuned. We'll be wrapping up day 2 very shortly. Okay, everyone. It has been an amazing day. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. So much fun, so many great speakers. I want to say thank you to our sponsors again. I gave them a shout out earlier, but a quick thank you to them again. If you don't mind, tag them, thank them. They help to make this event possible, make this event free for all of us to attend, all of you to attend. It's probably free for me to get up here and speak, but for the rest of you to get the word about it. So thank you to them for making this possible. We appreciate them. Really quick, one last bit of announcements. If I can get my stuff here to play. One last bit of announcements for you really quick. Someone in one of the last sessions, Johanna, I apologize. I don't know which one it is. She said, I don't know how you're going to top this in the coming days of the week. And I don't know about topping it, but I will say we have more amazing, more insightful speakers. They're going to educate. They're going to inspire. I promise. I can guarantee that. I know that for sure. So tomorrow, some things you can expect. Jennifer McClure, she's the head of Disrupt HR, and she's going to talk about disrupting yourself, disrupting your HR function right now, using the environment we're in to disrupt things going forward. We're going to hear from Katrina Kibben. I call her my expert on how to write like a human, but she's going to talk about why your job postings aren't working, what to do. She's a fun person, great insights there, and it will be a masterclass on how to create better content as you're trying to talk about your company and talk about your culture and your brand. And one last one that I wanted to highlight was Renee Robinson. She is going to talk to us about how to leave an HR legacy. And that story, I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation with her. It's a fireside chat, and I'm going to ask her about how we can do that well, how we can create this lasting legacy, what people are going to say about us when we're not doing HR day to day anymore, and how we can create the right kind of environment around us to make that stick long term. So much more. That's just tomorrow. So I am honored to be part of this. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your valuable life, your valuable day. We heard George Rogers this morning say the one thing you can't get more of is time, and time is something that I treasure. So thank you so much for spending time with me, with the other participants here. So many great comments, so many good conversations. Tomorrow we'll be giving away more books, more resources, more things as people are continuing to comment and share during the event. Thank you to each of you for what you've done, for what you're continuing to do in your own companies, in your own work, in your own careers to make HR a better community for all of us. I appreciate you, and I will see you tomorrow on HR Summer School.